The sound of a slamming door echoed through the lavish manor house as Zachary Gilmore stormed into the bedroom, his face contorted with rage. Zara Gilmore backed away, her fingers trembling as she clutched the delicate lace collar of her dress. It was 1878 in the frontier town of Redemption Creek, Wyoming territory, and Zara's life had become a beautiful prison. "You've embarrassed me for the last time," Zachary snarled, yanking a key from his waistcoat pocket. "Speaking to that filthy cowhand at the mercantile like you were common folk." "I was merely thanking him for retrieving my handkerchief," Zara protested, her voice barely audible above the thundering of her heart. At 22, she had spent the last 3 years learning that her husband's jealousy knew no bounds. 3 days of solitude will remind you of your place in this household." Zachary's eyes narrowed as he backed toward the door. "Your meals will be delivered, but you'll not set foot outside this room until I deem your attitude properly adjusted." The lock turned with a definitive click, and Zara collapsed onto the edge of the bed, her hands covering her face as tears streamed down her cheeks. This wasn't the first time Zachary had locked her away, but his punishments were becoming more frequent, his temper more volatile. The morning sun had barely risen over the distant mountains when Zara heard the sound of horses in the yard below. Rushing to the window, she saw Zachary mounting his prized stallion, flanked by 2 of his ranch hands. "Business in Cheyenne," she heard him tell the stable boy. "I'll return in 2 days' time." Zara's heart sank. 2 more days alone, locked in this gilded cage. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, watching as her husband's figure grew smaller in the distance. The daughter of a respected Boston merchant, she had believed Zachary's promises of adventure and prosperity in the West. Instead, she'd found herself isolated on his sprawling ranch, miles from town, with only his carefully selected staff for company. As the morning progressed, Zara paced the confines of her room, pausing occasionally to gaze at the vast expanse of Wyoming wilderness visible from her window. The ranch spread out before her like a kingdom, Zachary's kingdom. 15,000 acres of prime grazing land had made him one of the most powerful men in the territory. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Mrs. Gilmore, I've brought your breakfast." It was Esther, the housekeeper, one of the few staff members who showed Zara any kindness. "Thank you, Esther," Zara called, hearing the scrape of the tray being set outside her door. "He's taken the key with him, madam," Esther whispered through the keyhole. "I've no way to let you out." Zara felt her hopes crumble. "It's all right, I understand." But understanding didn't make her confinement any easier to bear. As the day wore on, Zara tried to occupy herself with needlework and reading, but her thoughts continually drifted to the world beyond her door. What would it feel like to be truly free, to make her own choices? To love someone who valued her as more than a possession. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across her room when Zara heard an unusual commotion from below. Male voices, unfamiliar ones carried up from the yard. Curiosity drew her to the window once more. 3 men on horseback had ridden into the ranch yard. 2 appeared to be ranch hands from a neighboring property, but it was the third that captured Zara's attention. Tall and broad-shouldered, he sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. A worn leather hat shaded his face, but when he tilted his head back to survey the house, Zara caught a glimpse of striking blue eyes beneath the brim. He was speaking to Henry, Zachary's foreman, gesturing toward the east pasture where Zachary had been planning to expand. A land dispute, perhaps. Zachary had mentioned that the neighboring ranch owner had contested his claim to the water rights along the creek that divided their properties. As if sensing her gaze, the stranger suddenly looked up toward her window. Zara instinctively stepped back, but not before their eyes met in a moment of startling connection. She felt heat rise to her cheeks as she retreated into the shadows of her room. Minutes later, she heard heavy footsteps on the stairs, followed by a knock at her door. "Mrs. Gilmore." It was Henry. "There's a situation with the Barrett Ranch that needs attention. Mr. Barrett's foreman is here about the water rights." "I'm afraid I can't help you, Henry," Zara called back, her voice tinged with bitterness. "My husband has locked me in, as you're well aware." A pause followed her words, then a deeper voice one she hadn't heard before spoke through the door. "Madam, I'm Brody Valente from the Silvercrest Ranch. We need to discuss the dam your husband's men are building. It's cutting off our water supply." "I would gladly speak with you, Mr. Valente, but as you can see, or rather, as you cannot see, I'm currently indisposed." Zara couldn't keep the edge from her voice. Another silence, then the doorknob rattled. "You're locked in?" The question held a note of disbelief. "My husband considers it an appropriate punishment for perceived social indiscretions," Zara replied, surprising herself with her candor. "He'll return in 2 days. Perhaps you could return then." 2 days? And you're to remain locked in this room until then?" The stranger's voice had hardened. "It's not your concern, Mr. Valente." Zara moved closer to the door, lowering her voice. "Please just go, you'll only make things worse." "Henry," the man said, his tone commanding despite the softness of his words, "does Mr. Gilmore often lock his wife away?" Henry's response was inaudible, but whatever he said caused the stranger to swear under his breath. "Mrs. Gilmore, stand back from the door." "What? No, you can't," but her protest came too late. A tremendous crash shook the door as something or someone slammed against it. A second impact splintered the frame, and with the third, the lock gave way entirely. The door swung open to reveal Brody Valente, his shoulder braced against the damaged wood, his expression a mixture of determination and barely contained fury. Zara stood frozen in the middle of the room, her eyes wide as she took in the man who had just broken down her door. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 28 or 30, with a strong, tanned face partially covered by several days' growth of beard. His eyes, as blue as she'd glimpsed from the window, now regarded her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Not anymore," he said simply, gesturing toward the broken door. "No man has the right to cage another human being like an animal." "You don't understand," Zara whispered, though she couldn't deny the leap of hope his words had sparked within her. When Zachary returns, he'll answer to the law for what he's done." Brody's voice was quiet but firm. He stepped into the room, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that seemed at odds with the violence of his entry. "Madam, I came here to discuss water rights, but I won't leave knowing you're being held against your will." Henry appeared in the doorway behind him, his weathered face creased with worry. "Mr. Valente, the master will have my job for this." "The master?" Brody's eyebrows rose as he turned to the foreman. "You speak of him like you're still living in the antebellum South, Henry. This is 1878 in the Wyoming Territory, and slavery has been abolished." "It's not the same," Henry protested weakly. "Isn't it?" Brody looked back at Zara, his gaze softening as he took in her pale face and the dark circles beneath her eyes. "Mrs. Gilmore, I don't mean to frighten you, but I can't in good conscience leave you here." Zara's mind raced. She had dreamed of escape countless times, but now that the opportunity presented itself, fear gripped her heart. Zachary's influence extended throughout the territory. Where could she possibly go that he wouldn't find her? "You don't know my husband," she said, her voice trembling. "He'll never let me go. He'll track me to the ends of the earth. Let me worry about that." Brody stepped closer, his voice gentle. "Do you want to leave, Mrs. Gilmore? If you tell me you're happy here, that you want to stay, I'll ride away and not look back. But if you want your freedom, I'll help you find it. The question hung in the air between them, simple yet profound. Did she want to leave? Memories flooded Zara's mind, Zachary's rage when she spoke to other men, the bruises he left when he gripped her arms too tightly, the weeks of isolation when she misbehaved. She thought of her dreams, long suppressed, of a life where she could speak her mind, make her own choices, perhaps even find love based on mutual respect rather than possession. Yes, she whispered, the word feeling like both surrender and victory. I want to leave. Relief crossed Brody's face. Pack only what you need: clothes, personal items. Nothing that would slow us down. Zara moved quickly, pulling a carpet bag from beneath her bed. Her hands trembled as she filled it with practical items: a change of clothes, her mother's locket, the small amount of money she had managed to set aside from her household allowance. She changed from her house dress into a riding outfit, grateful that Zachary had at least allowed her to keep her own riding habit. "Mrs. Gilmore," Henry said from the doorway, his voice strained, "please reconsider. The master will be furious. He'll come after you both." "The master is a bully who imprisons his wife," Brody replied before Zara could speak, "and I've never had much patience for bullies, Henry." Zara fastened the last button on her riding jacket and turned to face the men. "I'm ready." Brody nodded, offering her his arm. "My men are waiting below. We'll take you to Silvercrest Ranch for now. It's the last place your husband will look." As they descended the grand staircase, Zara felt as though she were walking through a dream. The house that had been her prison for 3 years seemed suddenly unfamiliar, as if she were seeing it through new eyes. Esther appeared in the hallway, her hands clutched to her chest. "Mrs. Gilmore." "What's happening?" "I'm leaving, Esther." Zara paused, her grip tightening on Brody's arm. "I can't stay here anymore." To her surprise, the older woman's face softened with understanding. "God be with you, child. Be safe." Outside, the afternoon sun warmed Zara's face as she breathed the free air. Brody's men watched curiously as he helped her mount a gentle mare they had brought along. "This is Mrs. Gilmore," Brody told them. "She'll be staying at Silvercrest for a while. Any questions you have can wait until we're safely home." The men exchanged glances but nodded respectfully. As they rode away from the Gilmore ranch, Zara couldn't help looking back at the imposing house that had been both her home and her prison. Fear still churned in her stomach, fear of Zachary's retribution, fear of an uncertain future, but beneath it burned a spark of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. They rode in silence for the first mile, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hooves and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. Zara had never ventured this far from the ranch without Zachary or his men. The vastness of the landscape was both intimidating and exhilarating. "Are you all right, Mrs. Gilmore?" Brody asked, guiding his horse alongside hers. "We can rest if you need to." "Please call me Zara," she replied, summoning a brave smile. "And no, I don't want to stop, not until we're far from here." Brody nodded, studying her with those piercing blue eyes. "Zara, then, I'm Brody, and I promise you you're safe now." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten with emotion. How long had it been since anyone had truly cared about her safety and happiness? "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You don't even know me." Brody was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "My sister was married to a man like your husband," he finally said, his voice low. "By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I won't make that mistake again." The simple statement held worlds of pain and regret. Zara wanted to ask what had happened to his sister, but sensed it was a wound still too raw to probe. "I'm sorry," she said instead. "Don't be sorry," Brody replied, his expression softening as he looked at her. "Be free." The Silvercrest Ranch came into view as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. Unlike the ostentatious grandeur of Zachary's property, Brody's home had a welcoming simplicity. The main house was a substantial log structure with a wide porch, flanked by well-maintained outbuildings and corrals. A small creek, presumably the one at the center of the water rights dispute, meandered along the eastern edge of the property. As they rode into the yard, a tall woman with graying hair emerged from the house, surprise evident on her weathered face. "Brody Valente, you told me you were going to speak to Gilmore about the dam, not bring home a beautiful woman." Her tone was scolding, but her eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Change of plans, Martha," Brody replied, dismounting before helping Zara from her horse. "This is Mrs. Gilmore, Zara. She'll be staying with us for a while." Martha's eyebrows shot up. "Gilmore, as in Zachary Gilmore's wife?" Zara nodded, suddenly feeling uncertain under the older woman's scrutiny. "Well, I never," Martha muttered, then seemed to collect herself. "Come inside, dear. You look like you could use a hot meal and a cup of tea." Brody gave Zara a reassuring nod. "Martha's been running this household since my parents passed. She may talk gruff, but she's got a heart of gold. Go on inside. I'll see to the horses and be right in." The interior of the Valente home was as different from the Gilmore mansion as could be imagined. Where Zachary's house was filled with expensive imported furniture and ostentatious decorations meant to impress, Brody's home was comfortable and lived in. Handcrafted wooden furniture, colorful quilts, and shelves lined with books gave the main room a welcoming warmth. "Sit yourself down," Martha instructed, gesturing to the kitchen table. "I want to hear exactly what brought the wife of Zachary Gilmore to our doorstep, but first, let's get some food in you. You're thin as a rail." As Martha busied herself at the stove, Zara took in her surroundings. Photos in simple frames adorned the mantel, a stern-faced couple she assumed were Brody's parents, a younger Brody in uniform, had he fought in the war, and a beautiful young woman whose eyes held a striking resemblance to Brody's. His sister, perhaps. "That's Rebecca," Martha said, noticing Zara's gaze. "Brody's sister, beautiful girl inside and out." "Was?" Zara asked softly, catching the past tense. Martha's lips pressed into a thin line. "Not my story to tell, dear." The door opened and Brody entered, bringing with him the scent of horses and the outdoors. He removed his hat and hung it on a peg by the door, running a hand through his dark hair. "Everything all right?" he asked, his eyes finding Zara's. She nodded, offering a small smile. "Your home is lovely." "It's not much compared to what you're used to," he replied, taking a seat across from her. "It's perfect," Zara said honestly. "It feels like a home, not a showcase." Something in her words seemed to please him, and a brief smile softened his features before he turned serious again. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said, as Martha set steaming bowls of stew before them. "Zachary will be back tomorrow, and when he finds you gone, he'll tear the territory apart looking for you." Fear clutched at Zara's heart. "I hadn't thought beyond escaping. I have some money saved. Perhaps I could take the train east." "Running's not the answer," Brody said, shaking his head. "If you disappear, he'll never stop looking, and a woman traveling alone is vulnerable." "What do you suggest, then?" Zara asked, her spoon suspended halfway to her mouth. Brody met her eyes steadily. "We need to make it clear that you've left him of your own free will, and that you're under protection. I know the territorial judge in Cheyenne. He's a fair man who won't be swayed by Zachary's influence. If you file for divorce on grounds of cruelty, divorce." Zara nearly choked on the word. In Boston, divorce was spoken of in hushed, scandalized tones. A divorced woman was damaged goods, shunned by decent society. "This isn't Boston, Zara," Brody said gently, as if reading her thoughts. "The West has different rules. Women are scarce out here and they're valued. A divorcee won't face the same stigma, especially when the facts of your situation become known." But Zachary would never agree to it, and without his agreement, in this territory, a woman can divorce her husband on grounds of cruelty without his consent, Brody interrupted. "It won't be easy, and he'll fight it every step of the way, but it can be done." Zara stared into her stew, considering his words. The idea of legally severing her ties to Zachary was both terrifying and tantalizing. To be truly free of him, not just running and hiding. "I'll help you," Brody continued. "I have friends in town, the sheriff, the judge, people who won't be intimidated by Zachary's money or influence." "Why would you do all this for me?" Zara asked, looking up to meet his gaze. "The water rights dispute, I understand, but this goes far beyond that." Brody's eyes darkened with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "Because no one helped Rebecca when she needed it most," he said, his voice rough. "And because what your husband is doing is wrong. Sometimes in this life, we get a chance to right a wrong, and when that chance comes, a decent person takes it." The simple honesty in his words moved her deeply. In a world where most men had wanted something from her father's business connections, Zachary's desire for a beautiful, well-bred wife to enhance his status, Brody's straightforward decency, was startlingly refreshing. "All right," she said finally. "I'll go to the judge." Relief crossed Brody's face. "Good. We'll ride to Cheyenne first thing in the morning." Martha, who had been quietly listening to their conversation, spoke up. "In the meantime, you'll need a place to sleep. I've made up the spare room for you, dear. It's small, but it's clean and comfortable." "Thank you, Martha," Zara said sincerely, "for everything." Later, as Zara settled into the narrow bed in the spare room, she found herself staring at the ceiling, her mind too full for sleep. The events of the day played through her thoughts on an endless loop: the broken door, Brody's determined face, the exhilarating and terrifying moment of decision when she chose to leave. What would tomorrow bring? Zachary wouldn't take her defiance lightly. His pride alone would demand retribution, not to mention his possessive nature. The thought of facing him across a courtroom made her stomach clench with anxiety. A soft knock at her door interrupted her troubled thoughts. "Zara, are you awake?" It was Brody's voice, pitched low to avoid disturbing the household. "Yes," she replied, sitting up and wrapping a quilt around her shoulders before opening the door. Brody stood in the hallway, still fully dressed despite the late hour. He held a small leather-bound book in his hands. "I thought you might want this," he said, offering her the book. "It belonged to Rebecca. It's a journal. She always said writing down her thoughts helped her make sense of them." Zara accepted the journal, touched by the gesture. "Thank you. I'm sorry about your sister, Brody." Pain flickered across his features. "Rebecca's husband beat her for 3 years before she finally found the courage to run," he said quietly. "She made it as far as my front porch before he caught up with her. I wasn't home." His voice caught. "By the time I returned, she was gone, and he had disappeared. They found his body a week later. He'd ridden his horse off a cliff in a drunken stupor." "I'm so sorry," Zara whispered, fighting the urge to reach out and touch his arm. "I promised myself I'd never stand by while another woman suffered the same fate," Brody continued, his blue eyes intense in the dim light of the hallway. "When I realized what your husband had done, locking you away like that, I couldn't just ride away." "You saved me," Zara said simply. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "Live free," Brody replied. "That's repayment enough." He hesitated, then added, "Try to get some sleep. We have a long ride to Cheyenne tomorrow." As he turned to go, Zara found herself reluctant to see him leave. "Brody," she called softly. When he looked back, she asked the question that had been nagging at her. "What if he finds me before we reach the judge?" Brody's expression hardened. "He won't touch you again, Zara. I give you my word." With that promise lingering between them, he bid her good night and disappeared down the hallway. Zara closed her door, clutching Rebecca's journal to her chest. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar stirring within her, not just hope, but the faint beginnings of trust. The dawn broke clear and bright over Silvercrest Ranch, painting the distant mountains with gold and rose. Zara had risen early, unable to sleep past the first light. The borrowed clothes Martha had provided, a simple skirt and blouse that had belonged to Rebecca, fit well enough, though they were slightly loose on her frame. "You need feeding up," Martha had declared, setting a hearty breakfast before her. "That husband of yours has been starving you, if you don't mind my saying so." Zara didn't mind. In fact, there was something liberating about Martha's blunt honesty after years of carefully measured words and hidden thoughts. Brody joined them as they were finishing breakfast, his expression serious. "I've saddled the horses," he said. "We should get an early start. It's a full day's ride to Cheyenne, and I'd rather not have to camp overnight." Zara nodded, rising from the table. "I'm ready." Martha pressed a bundle of food into her hands. "For the journey," she said, then surprised Zara by pulling her into a tight hug. "You come back to us, you hear? Whatever happens in Cheyenne, you've got a place here." Tears pricked Zara's eyes at the unexpected kindness. "Thank you, Martha." Outside, the morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine from the distant forests. 2 horses stood saddled and ready, Brody's sturdy gelding and the gentle mare Zara had ridden the day before. "No escort?" Zara asked, noticing they would be traveling alone. "I considered it," Brody admitted, checking the cinch on her saddle, "but decided we'd attract less attention as a pair. The main road to Cheyenne is well-traveled and relatively safe." His hand lingered on her horse's flank. "I won't let any harm come to you, Zara." The quiet intensity in his voice made her heart flutter unexpectedly. "I believe you." They set off as the sun cleared the eastern ridge, following a well-worn trail that wound through rolling hills covered with sagebrush and scattered stands of aspen. Zara found herself relaxing as they rode, the rhythm of the horse beneath her and the open sky above creating a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced in years. Brody was a comfortable traveling companion, neither forcing conversation nor leaving her entirely to her thoughts. He pointed out landmarks as they rode, the distant peaks of the Medicine Bow Mountains, the remains of a stage-coach station abandoned when the railroad came through, a herd of pronghorn antelope grazing on a distant hillside. "Have you lived in Wyoming long?" Zara asked as they stopped to rest the horses near a small creek. Brody nodded, handing her a canteen. "Born and raised. My father claimed this land just after the war with Mexico. I was born in that house back there," he said, gesturing in the direction they had come. "Except it was half the size then." "You fought in the war?" Zara asked, remembering the photograph of him in uniform. "Union cavalry," he confirmed. "Joined in '63 just after Gettysburg. Spent most of my time chasing Confederate raiders in Tennessee and Kentucky." His expression grew distant. "Came home in '65 to find my father dying and the ranch struggling. Rebecca had married by then and moved to her husband's place near Laramie. And your mother died when I was 14, pneumonia." Brody's voice was matter-of-fact, but Zara sensed the old grief beneath his words. "What about you? How did a Boston girl end up in Wyoming?" Zara sighed, capping the canteen and handing it back. "My father was a merchant textiles, mostly. He did business with Zachary, who came east regularly to buy goods for his ranch and various business interests. I was 20 when we met. He was charming, sophisticated, different from the Boston men I knew. She paused, remembering her younger self's infatuation. He painted such a romantic picture of life in the West. Adventure, freedom, a chance to build something new. And the reality didn't match the promise, Brody guessed. Not even close, Zara admitted. The isolation was the hardest part at first. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles from Zachary's ranch, and he discouraged visitors. Then his possessiveness grew worse. He couldn't bear to see me speak to another man, even in the most innocent circumstances. She swallowed hard. The first time he locked me in our room was 6 months after we arrived. I'd smiled at the young man who delivered our groceries. Brody's expression darkened. Did he hurt you, Zara? Physically? She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Not often, and never where it would show. He was too concerned with appearances for that. But yes, sometimes his temper got the better of him. A muscle worked in Brody's jaw as he absorbed her words. No judge worth his salt will send you back to that man, he said finally. Not once they hear your story. They remounted and continued their journey, the sun climbing higher as they traversed the rolling landscape. Around midday, they stopped in the shade of a small grove of cottonwoods to rest and eat some of the food Martha had prepared. We're making good time, Brody said, checking his pocket watch. We should reach Cheyenne by nightfall if we keep this pace. Zara nodded, trying to ignore the growing anxiety in her stomach as they drew closer to town. What would happen when Zachary discovered her gone? Would he guess where she had fled? What if he intercepted them before they reached the judge? You're worried, Brody observed, studying her face. Terrified might be more accurate, Zara admitted with a small, self-deprecating smile. I've never defied Zachary like this before. He won't take it well. You're not alone this time, Brody reminded her, his voice gentle but firm. And Zachary Gilmore isn't the only man with influence in this territory. As they packed up to continue their journey, a distant cloud of dust on the horizon caught Brody's attention. He stood, shading his eyes with his hand as he peered into the distance. Riders, he said, his voice suddenly tense. Coming fast. Zara felt her heart skip a beat. Zachary, can't tell yet, but we shouldn't take chances. Brody grabbed her arm, guiding her quickly toward the horses. Mount up. We'll cut cross-country and try to lose them in the hills. With trembling hands, Zara pulled herself into the saddle. The approaching riders were still just a smudge of dust in the distance, but the sight filled her with dread. Brody swung up beside her, his expression grim. Stay close to me, he instructed, spurring his horse toward a rocky outcropping to the south. If we get separated, keep heading southeast toward Cheyenne. They rode hard, abandoning the main trail for a lesser-used path that wound through a series of low hills. Zara's heart pounded in rhythm with her horse's hooves, fear and exhilaration mingling in her blood. The mare beneath her was sure-footed and responsive, following Brody's mount without hesitation. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Brody signaled for them to slow. They had entered a narrow canyon, its walls providing shelter from prying eyes. I think we've lost them, he said, his voice low as he scanned the ridge above. But we should keep moving. This route will add a few miles to our journey, but it's safer. Zara nodded, trying to catch her breath. Do you think it was Zachary? Could have been, Brody admitted. Or it might have been a completely innocent party traders, perhaps, or a cavalry patrol. But I don't believe in taking unnecessary risks. As they continued through the canyon, Zara found herself studying Brody's profile. In just over a day, this man had transformed her life completely. He had broken down her prison door, offered her sanctuary, and now was risking Zachary's wrath to help her secure her freedom. Why? Was it truly just because of his sister? What will you do? She asked suddenly. After we reach Cheyenne and speak to the judge, Zachary will blame you for taking me. He may retaliate against your ranch." Brody glanced over at her, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "Let him try. Gilmore's not the only one with friends in high places. Besides, the water rights dispute gives me a legitimate reason to have sought him out. If he wants to make more of it, he'll only draw attention to his own actions." His confidence was reassuring, but Zara couldn't shake the feeling that Zachary wouldn't let the matter rest so easily. He was a man accustomed to getting his way, through charm when possible and force when necessary. The thought of him turning that force against Brody made her stomach clench with anxiety. They emerged from the canyon into a broad valley as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western horizon. In the distance, Zara could make out the faint outlines of buildings Cheyenne, still several hours' ride away. "We'll push on," Brody decided after consulting his watch again. "It'll be dark by the time we reach town, but I'd rather not spend the night in the open." As they rode across the valley floor, Zara found herself thinking about what awaited her in Cheyenne. If all went well, she would begin the process of legally ending her marriage to Zachary. And then what? She had no family in the West, few friends, and limited resources of her own. The future stretched before her like an uncharted wilderness, frightening, but filled with possibilities. The sun was setting in a blaze of red and gold when they crested a final ridge and saw Cheyenne spread out below them. Unlike the small, rough settlement Zara had expected, the territorial capital was a substantial city with proper streets, brick buildings, and even a few gas lamps flickering to life as darkness fell. "It's bigger than I expected," she commented as they descended toward the town. "Railroad made it boom," Brody explained. "Union Pacific came through in '67, turned a tent camp into the largest city in the territory practically overnight." They rode down the main street, past saloons and mercantiles, a newspaper office and a telegraph station, hotels and restaurants. Despite the growing darkness, the town was alive with activity: cowboys and businessmen, shop girls and society ladies, all mingling on the wooden sidewalks. Brody guided them to a modest but respectable-looking hotel near the courthouse. "We'll stay here tonight," he said, dismounting and helping Zara from her horse. "The judge won't be available until morning anyway." Zara suddenly realized the awkwardness of their situation. A man and woman traveling together, seeking lodging for the night. Even in the relatively permissive atmosphere of the West, certain proprieties were still observed. Brody seemed to read her thoughts. "I'll get 2 rooms," he said quietly as they approached the hotel entrance. "And I'll register you as my sister, Mrs. Rebecca Wilson, a widow. It will prevent awkward questions." Gratitude washed over Zara. "Thank you." Inside, the hotel lobby was clean and well-appointed, if not luxurious. A middle-aged man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from the desk as they entered. "Evening, folks. Looking for rooms?" "Yes, sir," Brody replied, approaching the desk. "2 rooms, please. For myself and my sister, Mrs. Wilson. We've had a long journey." The clerk's eyes flicked between them, perhaps noting the lack of family resemblance, but he merely nodded and turned the register for Brody to sign. "Rooms 204 and 206. Adjoining, if that suits. Baths at the end of the hall, extra charge of 25 cents. "That'll be fine," Brody said, signing the register and paying for the rooms. As they climbed the stairs to the second floor, Zara felt the exhaustion of the day's journey settling into her bones. The fear and anxiety, the hard riding, the constant vigilance, it had all taken its toll. "You should rest," Brody said as he unlocked her door. "I'll arrange for some food to be sent up, and then we can talk about tomorrow." The room was simple but clean: a narrow bed, a washstand with basin and pitcher, a small writing desk beside the window that overlooked the main street. Zara sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of what she had done. She had fled her husband, ridden across the territory with a virtual stranger, and now sat in a hotel room in Cheyenne, preparing to publicly declare Zachary's cruelty and petition for divorce. A soft knock announced Brody's return. He entered carrying a tray with 2 covered plates, which he set on the small table by the window. "It's just stew and bread," he said, removing his hat and setting it aside. "But the clerk assured me it's the best in town." Zara managed a tired smile. "It smells wonderful." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Brody outlined his plan for the next day. "Judge Harmon usually begins court at 9, he explained. "I'll go see him beforehand, explain the situation. He's a fair man, and he has no love for bullies like your husband. Once he hears your story, I believe he'll issue an order of protection immediately." "An order of protection," Zara repeated. "It's a legal document that forbids Zachary from approaching or harassing you while the divorce proceedings are underway," Brody explained. "It won't stop a determined man entirely, but it gives the law a reason to intervene if he tries anything." Zara nodded, trying to absorb all the information. "And the divorce itself, how long will that take?" "That depends on how hard Zachary fights it," Brody admitted. "If he contests it, it could take months. If he recognizes he's fighting a losing battle, it might be resolved more quickly." "He'll fight," Zara said with certainty. "His pride won't allow anything else." Brody studied her face in the lamplight. "Are you having second thoughts?" "No," Zara replied without hesitation. "I'm scared, yes. Uncertain about the future, definitely. But I won't go back to that life, Brody. Not now that I've tasted freedom again." Something like admiration flickered in his blue eyes. "You're braver than you give yourself credit for, Zara Gilmore." The use of her married name sent a shiver of discomfort through her. Soon, she hoped, she would reclaim her maiden name and with it, her identity separate from Zachary. "What will you do?" Brody asked gently. "After the divorce, I mean." It was a question Zara had been asking herself since they left Silvercrest. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I have some money saved, not much, but enough to perhaps start over somewhere. Boston, maybe, though the scandal might follow me there." "You could stay in Wyoming," Brody suggested, his tone carefully neutral. "Martha has already grown fond of you, and Silvercrest has plenty of room." Zara looked up, surprised by the offer. "You would let me stay?" "Even with the trouble Zachary will surely cause." A half-smile curved Brody's lips. "I'm not afraid of Zachary Gilmore, and yes, I would be honored if you chose to stay." He paused, then added more softly, "The house has been too quiet since Rebecca died." The simple statement held layers of meaning that made Zara's heart beat faster. Was he offering mere friendship and protection, or was there something more behind his words? And why did the question matter so much to her after knowing him for barely 2 days? "I'll consider it," she said finally. "Thank you," Brody nodded, rising from his chair. "I should let you rest. Tomorrow will be challenging." He moved toward the door, then hesitated, turning back to face her. "Zara, whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that a commotion from the street below interrupted him." Shouts and the sound of horses arriving at speed drew them both to the window. In the pool of light cast by the hotel's front lamps, Zara could make out several riders dismounting, their horses lathered and blowing from hard riding. Her blood froze in her veins as she recognized the lead figure, tall and imposing, his silver-streaked dark hair unmistakable even from a distance. "Zachary," she whispered, unconsciously stepping back from the window. "He's found us." Brody's expression hardened as he confirmed her identification. "Stay here," he instructed, moving quickly to the door. "Lock this behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me, understand?" Zara nodded, her throat too tight with fear to speak. As Brody disappeared into the hallway, she turned the key in the lock with trembling fingers, then pressed her ear to the door, straining to hear what was happening. Muffled voices from below indicated that Zachary had entered the hotel. Zara could imagine the scene, her husband demanding information from the clerk, perhaps brandishing money or threats to loosen the man's tongue. Would he reveal their presence? Would he mention that Brody had registered her as his widowed sister? Minutes passed like hours as Zara waited, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it could be heard through the door. Then came the sound she dreaded, heavy footsteps on the stairs, followed by Zachary's voice, too indistinct to make out the words but unmistakably his. Another voice responded, Brody's, calm but firm. The two men were in the hallway now, their conversation becoming clearer. "No right to take my wife," Zachary was saying, his tone cold with fury. "She is my property and you've committed a crime by abducting her." "Your property?" Brody's voice was equally cold. "She's a human being, Gilmore, not a piece of furniture. And I didn't abduct her, I freed her from illegal imprisonment." "How dare you interfere in my personal affairs?" Zachary's voice rose. "Step aside, Valente. I'm taking my wife home where she belongs." "She's not going anywhere with you," Brody replied. "Not tonight, not ever again, unless it's her choice." There was a moment of tense silence, then Zachary spoke again, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "I see. So it's like that, is it? You want her for yourself." "Well, I can't say I blame you. She's a beautiful woman. But she's mine, and I don't share what's mine." "This isn't about me," Brody said evenly. "It's about your cruelty and Zara's right to live without fear. Tomorrow morning we're going before Judge Harmon. Zara will petition for divorce on grounds of cruelty, and she'll request an order of protection against you." Zachary's laugh held no humor. "You think a territorial judge will side with a woman against one of the most powerful men in Wyoming? You're more naive than I thought, Valente." "Justice doesn't bow to money or influence," Brody replied. "Not in Judge Harmon's court." "We'll see about that," Zachary said, his voice hardening. "In the meantime, I want to speak to my wife, now." "That's not happening," Brody's voice was implacable. "Go back to your hotel, Gilmore. Sleep off whatever you've been drinking. In the morning, if you're sober, you can present yourself to the judge like a civilized man." The tension in the hallway was palpable even through the closed door. Zara held her breath, waiting for the explosion she knew was coming. Zachary had never taken well to being denied. The sound came suddenly, a thud followed by a grunt of pain. Had Zachary struck Brody? Alarmed, Zara pressed closer to the door, straining to hear what was happening. The scuffling sounds of a struggle reached her ears, punctuated by the crash of something breaking. Unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Zara unlocked her door and cautiously opened it a crack. The scene in the hallway made her gasp Brody and Zachary locked in a violent struggle. Zachary's face contorted with rage as he tried to force his way past Brody toward her room. Brody, though slightly smaller than her husband, was holding his ground, blocking the larger man's progress with determined strength. "Zara," Zachary bellowed, catching sight of her in the doorway. "Come here this instant." Instinct nearly made her obey, the habit of submission deeply ingrained after years of conditioning. But something had changed within her. The woman who had meekly accepted Zachary's punishments no longer existed. "No, Zachary," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm not coming back to you, not now, not ever." Zachary's face darkened with fury. "You ungrateful little, that's enough," Brody interrupted, shoving Zachary back with unexpected force. She's made her choice, Gilmore. Accept it and leave with some dignity intact. For a moment, Zachary seemed speechless with rage. Then, with a roar of anger, he lunged at Brody, his fist connecting with the younger man's jaw in a blow that sent him staggering. "Brody!" Zara cried, fully opening her door now. Zachary seized the opportunity, pushing past the momentarily stunned Brody toward Zara. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist in a painful grip. "You're coming home," he snarled, yanking her toward him. "And when we get there, you'll learn what happens to wives who disobey their husbands." Terror flooded Zara's veins, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of defiant anger. With a strength born of desperation, she twisted in his grip and brought her knee up sharply between his legs. Zachary doubled over with a howl of pain, releasing her wrist as he clutched at himself. Brody recovered quickly, grabbing Zachary by the collar and slamming him against the wall. "Touch her again," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "and it will be the last thing you do." The commotion had drawn attention. The hotel clerk appeared at the top of the stairs, followed by several other guests and a burly man wearing a sheriff's badge. "What in tarnation is going on here?" the sheriff demanded, taking in the scene with a practiced eye. "Sheriff Turner," Brody acknowledged, still pinning Zachary to the wall. "This man was attempting to abduct Mrs. Gilmore against her will." "Lies," Zachary spat. "She's my wife, and this man has corrupted her, turned her against me. I was simply retrieving what is mine." Sheriff Turner's weathered face remained impassive as he considered the situation. "Mrs. Gilmore," he said, addressing Zara directly, "is what Mr. Valente says true? Was this man trying to take you against your will?" Zara straightened her spine, meeting the sheriff's gaze directly. "Yes, Sheriff. My husband locked me in our bedroom for days as punishment. Mr. Valente freed me and brought me to Cheyenne to seek legal protection. We intend to speak with Judge Harmon in the morning about a divorce petition and an order of protection." The sheriff's eyebrows rose slightly at her calm recitation of the facts. "I see." He turned to Zachary, who was still breathing heavily, his face flushed with anger. "Mr. Gilmore, I'm going to have to ask you to leave these premises. If you have a legal claim on your wife, you can present it to the judge tomorrow." "This is outrageous," Zachary exploded. "I demand you arrest this man for stealing my wife." "A wife isn't property to be stolen," Sheriff Turner replied evenly. "Now, are you going to leave peacefully, or do I need to escort you to a cell to cool off overnight?" For a moment, Zara thought Zachary might actually choose the cell. His face was nearly purple with rage, his fists clenched at his sides. But then, with a visible effort, he regained control of himself. "This isn't over," he said, his voice deadly quiet as his gaze shifted between Brody and Zara. "Not by a long shot." With that ominous promise hanging in the air, he turned and stalked toward the stairs, shouldering past the sheriff without another word. The assembled spectators parted to let him pass, watching with wide eyes as he descended and eventually slammed out of the hotel's front door. Sheriff Turner turned back to Brody and Zara. "You two all right?" Brody nodded, gingerly touching his jaw where Zachary's fist had connected. "We're fine, Sheriff. Thank you for your timely intervention." "Heard the commotion all the way from the saloon across the street," Turner said with a slight smile. "Figured I'd better investigate." His expression grew more serious. "You really planning to see Judge Harmon in the morning?" "Yes," Zara confirmed. "I can't go back to him, Sheriff. I won't." Turner nodded, seeming satisfied with her resolve. "Judge Harmon's a good man. He'll hear you out fair and square." He glanced at Brody. "You might want to put something cold on that jaw. Gilmore packs quite a punch for a man his age." After the sheriff and the curious onlookers had dispersed, Brody and Zara retreated into her room, closing the door firmly behind them. Zara sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline drained from her system. "Are you really all right?" she asked, looking up at Brody with concern. "Your face." Brody touched his jaw again, wincing slightly. "I've had worse. What about you? He grabbed you pretty hard." Zara rubbed her wrist where Zachary's fingers had dug into her flesh. "I'll have bruises tomorrow, but it's nothing new." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "At least this time they'll serve as evidence." Brody's expression darkened at her words. He crossed to the washstand and poured water from the pitcher into the basin, wetting a cloth and pressing it to his jaw. "I'm sorry he found us so quickly. Someone must have seen us and recognized you." "It doesn't matter," Zara said, surprising herself with her calmness. "We knew he would find out eventually. Better to face him here, with witnesses and the law nearby, than to keep running." Brody regarded her with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "You're taking this better than I expected." "I surprised myself too," Zara admitted. "When I saw him grab you, something inside me just changed. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry." She looked down at her hands, remembering the surge of defiance she had felt. "I've spent 3 years being afraid of that man, letting him control me with fear. I won't do it anymore." Brody set aside the damp cloth and came to sit beside her on the bed, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "What you did took courage," he said quietly. "Not many women would have fought back like that." "Not many women have someone like you standing beside them," Zara replied, meeting his eyes. The intensity of his gaze made her heart skip a beat. "Thank you, Brody. Not just for protecting me tonight, but for making me believe I deserve protection." Something shifted in the air between them, a subtle change in the quality of their shared silence. Brody's eyes dropped briefly to her lips before returning to meet her gaze. "Zara," he began, his voice low and earnest, "I need you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, whatever you decide to do afterward." A sharp knock at the door interrupted him once again. Brody rose quickly, his hand moving instinctively to the pistol at his hip. "Who is it?" he called. "Sheriff Turner," came the reply. "Sorry to disturb you folks again, but I thought you should know Gilmore's gathered some men. They're drinking heavily at the Drover's saloon, making threats. Might be nothing, but I thought you should be aware." Brody opened the door to find the sheriff looking grim. "You think he'll try something tonight?" Brody asked. Turner shrugged. "Hard to say. The man's pride is wounded and he's been drinking, not a good combination. I've posted a deputy in the lobby just in case, but I'd advise keeping your door locked and your gun handy." "Thank you, Sheriff," Zara said from where she sat on the bed. "We appreciate the warning." After the sheriff left, Brody turned to Zara, his expression troubled. "I think I should stay in here tonight," he said, "just to be safe." Under normal circumstances, the suggestion would have been scandalous, an unmarried man spending the night in a woman's hotel room. But these were hardly normal circumstances, and the thought of being alone with Zachary potentially prowling the hotel made Zara's skin crawl. "Yes," she agreed. "That would be prudent." Brody nodded, moving to check that the window was securely locked before drawing the curtains. He then positioned a chair against the door, not enough to stop a determined intruder, but enough to provide warning if someone tried to enter. "You should get some rest," he said, gesturing toward the bed. "I'll take the chair." "You can't possibly be comfortable in that tiny chair all night," Zara protested. "The bed is large enough for both of us. We can maintain propriety." Her cheeks warmed at the suggestion, but practicality overrode conventional modesty. Brody hesitated, clearly weighing propriety against comfort. "Are you certain? I don't want to compromise your reputation any more than necessary." A small laugh escaped Zara. I think my reputation is already thoroughly compromised, don't you? Running away with a man who isn't my husband, spending nights unchaperoned. If Boston society could see me now, they'd have collective apoplexy. Her attempt at humor drew a reluctant smile from Brody. All right, he conceded, but I'll stay on top of the covers. The arrangement decided, they prepared for sleep as best they could. Zara kept her dress on but removed her shoes and outer jacket. Brody similarly removed only his boots and jacket, keeping his gun belt within easy reach beside the bed. As they settled onto opposite sides of the narrow mattress, Zara found herself acutely aware of Brody's presence, the warmth radiating from his body, the sound of his breathing, the faint scent of leather and pine that seemed to cling to him. It was both comforting and unsettling. "Try to sleep," Brody murmured, his voice low in the darkness. "Tomorrow will be challenging enough without exhaustion added to it." "What if he tries to stop us from reaching the judge?" Zara asked, voicing the fear that had been nagging at her. "He won't succeed," Brody replied with quiet certainty. "I promise you that, Zara. One way or another, you'll have your day in court." His confidence was reassuring. Zara closed her eyes, expecting sleep to elude her despite her exhaustion. To her surprise, the steady rhythm of Brody's breathing beside her acted as a lullaby, and she soon drifted into a deep, dreamless slumber. The gray light of dawn was filtering through the curtains when Zara awoke. For a moment, she was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings confusing her sleep-fogged mind. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back: the ride to Cheyenne, Zachary's arrival, the confrontation in the hallway. She became aware that she was no longer alone in the bed. During the night, she had shifted closer to Brody, drawn to his warmth like a flower seeking the sun. Her head now rested against his shoulder, and one of his arms had curved protectively around her. Embarrassment flooded her at the intimate position, but she didn't immediately move away. There was something profoundly comforting about his embrace, even if it had occurred unconsciously during sleep. When was the last time she had felt truly safe in a man's arms? Had she ever? Brody stirred, his eyes opening to find her watching him. For a moment, neither spoke, the unexpected intimacy of the moment hanging between them like a delicate thread. Then reality intruded as a knock sounded at the door, jolting them both fully awake. Brody was on his feet in an instant, gun in hand, as he moved cautiously toward the door. "Who is it?" he called. "Deputy Wilson, sir. Sheriff sent me to escort you and the lady to the courthouse when you're ready. Judge Harmon's been informed of the situation and has agreed to see you at 8 o'clock before regular court begins." Brody relaxed, lowering his weapon. "Thank you, Deputy. We'll be down shortly." As they prepared for the day ahead, Zara felt a strange mixture of nervousness and determination. Today would change the course of her life, one way or another. She smoothed the wrinkles from her borrowed dress as best she could and arranged her hair into a simple but neat style. "Ready?" Brody asked as she pinned the last strand in place. Zara met his eyes in the small mirror above the washstand. "As ready as I'll ever be." The deputy was waiting for them in the lobby, a young man with a serious expression and a nervous habit of adjusting his hat. "Sheriff's already at the courthouse, sir, madam," he informed them. "Said to bring you straight there." The streets of Cheyenne were beginning to come alive as they made their way toward the imposing brick building that housed the territorial court. Shopkeepers swept their sidewalks, delivery wagons rattled past, and early risers hurried to work or breakfast. The ordinary bustle of the town seemed surreal to Zara, whose entire future hung in the balance. "Any sign of Gilmore or his men this morning?" Brody asked the deputy as they walked. "Not so far," the young man replied. Sheriff had men watching the saloon and the hotel where he's staying. He turned in late, pretty deep in his cups from what I heard. Let's hope he sleeps late then, Brody said, though he didn't sound particularly hopeful. The courthouse was quiet at this early hour, with only a few clerks and lawyers preparing for the day's proceedings. Sheriff Turner met them at the entrance, his weathered face serious but kind as he greeted Zara. Judge Harmon's waiting in his chambers, he informed them. He's agreed to hear your petition in private, Mrs. Gilmore, given the sensitive nature of the matter. Relief washed over Zara. The thought of recounting Zachary's abuses in open court had been daunting. Judge Harmon proved to be a tall, austere man with a shock of white hair and penetrating gray eyes that seemed to look straight through pretense to the truth beneath. He listened without interruption, as Zara recounted the events of her marriage, the isolation, the controlling behavior, the occasional violence, and finally, the imprisonment that had precipitated her escape. And you are prepared to swear to the truth of these statements under oath, Mrs. Gilmore? The judge asked when she had finished. I am, Your Honor, Zara replied steadily. Judge Harmon nodded, then turned his attention to Brody. Mr. Valente, your involvement in this matter is somewhat unusual. You are neither a relative of Mrs. Gilmore nor an officer of the law. What prompted you to intervene in what most would consider a private matter between husband and wife? Brody met the judge's gaze directly. I discovered Mrs. Gilmore locked in her bedroom while visiting the Gilmore ranch on business, Your Honor. Her husband was absent, and she had been confined for days. I could not, in good conscience, leave her in such a situation. A matter of conscience, then, the judge mused. And nothing more. Zara felt her cheeks warm at the implied question. Was the judge suggesting that Brody had romantic intentions toward her? The thought was both embarrassing and, not entirely unwelcome, she realized with surprise. I believe in justice, Your Honor, Brody replied simply. What was happening to Mrs. Gilmore was unjust. My actions were based on that belief alone. Judge Harmon seemed satisfied with this answer. He turned his attention back to Zara. Mrs. Gilmore, are you requesting a divorce from your husband? I am, Your Honor. And you understand that such proceedings can be lengthy and at times unpleasant, particularly if your husband contests the petition. I understand, Your Honor, but I cannot return to that life, Zara said firmly. I would rather face whatever unpleasantness lies ahead than spend another day under Zachary Gilmore's control. The judge nodded, seeming impressed by her resolve. Very well. I am prepared to issue an order of protection immediately, prohibiting your husband from approaching or harassing you during the divorce proceedings. As for the divorce itself, the formal petition will need to be filed with the court clerk, and your husband will be served with papers. Given the evidence of cruelty you've presented, I see no reason why the petition should not be granted in due course. Relief swept through Zara so intensely that she felt momentarily lightheaded. Thank you, Your Honor, she managed. Don't thank me yet, Mrs. Gilmore, Judge Harmon cautioned. An order of protection is only as effective as the individual's willingness to respect it. From what you've told me of your husband, he may not be inclined to such respect. Which is why Mrs. Gilmore will be staying at my ranch until the proceedings are complete, Brody interjected. Under the protection of myself and my men. The judge raised an eyebrow. Again, Mr. Valente, your involvement exceeds what might be expected from a mere good Samaritan. My sister suffered a similar situation, Your Honor, Brody said quietly. She died because no one was willing to intervene. I won't stand by and see history repeat itself. Understanding dawned in the judge's eyes. I see. In that case, I commend your principles, Mr. Valente. He turned to his clerk. Prepare an order of protection for Mrs. Gilmore immediately. I'll sign it before court convenes." As they left the judge's chambers, Zara felt as though a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in years, the law was on her side. Zachary's power over her was beginning to crumble. What now? She asked Brody as they waited in the courthouse corridor for the clerk to prepare the necessary papers. "We file the divorce petition, then head back to Silvercrest," Brody replied. "The sooner we're away from town, the better. Zachary may be sleeping off his drink now, but he won't stay unconscious forever." Zara nodded, trying not to let her anxiety show. The journey back to Silvercrest would be tense, knowing Zachary might pursue them. But the alternative remaining in Cheyenne, where he could easily find her, was worse. Sheriff Turner approached them, his expression grim. "Just got word that Gilmore's up and about," he informed them. "He's hired 3 men rough characters from the looks of them. They're saddling up at the livery as we speak." Brody's jaw tightened. "We need to move quickly then." "How soon can we get the paperwork finalized?" "Judge Harmon's already signed the order of protection," Turner replied. "Clerk's preparing the divorce petition now. Should be ready in 15 minutes or so." Those 15 minutes stretched interminably as Zara and Brody waited, both acutely aware that Zachary could appear at any moment. When the clerk finally emerged with the completed paperwork, Zara signed it with hands that trembled only slightly. "I've arranged for fresh horses for you," Sheriff Turner told them as they prepared to leave. "They're waiting at the back entrance of the courthouse. I'll have a deputy escort you to the edge of town." "Thank you, Sheriff," Zara said sincerely, "for everything." Turner tipped his hat. "Just doing my job, madam. And between you and me, I never did like Gilmore much. Too high and mighty by half." The sheriff's words brought a small smile to Zara's lips as they followed him through the courthouse to where the horses waited. The day was fully dawned now, the sun climbing in a clear blue sky that promised heat by midday. Zara mounted the fresh mare with Brody's assistance, grateful for the sturdy animal beneath her. "We'll take the north road out of town," Brody decided, checking his saddle cinch one final time. "It's less direct, but less likely to be watched." The deputy who had escorted them to the courthouse mounted his own horse, positioning himself ahead of them as they set out. The streets were busier now. Citizens going about their daily business, most paying little attention to the 3 riders making their way toward the northern edge of town. They had almost reached the outskirts when Zara heard a shout from behind. Turning in her saddle, she felt her heart sink as she saw Zachary and 3 rough-looking men on horseback bearing down on them from a side street. "Ride," Brody commanded, spurring his horse forward. "Deputy, get Mrs. Gilmore to safety. I'll hold them off." "No." Zara protested, even as the deputy grabbed her horse's reins and urged both their mounts into a gallop. "We can't leave him." But the deputy was following orders, pulling her away from the confrontation unfolding behind them. Zara twisted in her saddle, watching in horror as Brody wheeled his horse to face the oncoming riders, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. "Stop," she heard him shout to Zachary and his men. "By order of Judge Harmon, you're to stay away from Mrs. Gilmore." Zachary's response was lost in the thunder of hooves, as the deputy led her around a bend in the road, cutting off her view of the confrontation. Tears of frustration and fear blurred Zara's vision as she urged her horse faster, torn between the need to escape and the desperate desire to go back for Brody. They had ridden perhaps a quarter mile when the sound of gunfire erupted behind them, 3 shots in rapid succession, followed by a 4th. Zara's blood turned to ice. "We have to go back," she insisted, pulling on her reins. "Brody might be hurt." The deputy hesitated, clearly torn between his duty to protect her and the need to help his fellow lawman. His decision was made for him when the sound of approaching hoofbeats reached their ears. They both turned, Zara's heart in her throat, to see a lone rider galloping toward them. "Brody," she breathed as the rider drew close enough to recognize. Relief flooded through her, so intense that she felt dizzy with it. Brody reined in beside them, his face grim but unharmed. "We need to keep moving," he said tersely. "Zachary's men won't be far behind." "What happened?" Zara demanded as they spurred their horses into motion once more. "Zachary wasn't inclined to respect the judge's order," Brody replied, his voice tight. "One of his men drew on me. I fired a warning shot. Things escalated. No one's badly hurt, but we've bought ourselves maybe 15 minutes at most." The deputy looked alarmed. "You shot someone, winged one of them in the shoulder," Brody confirmed. "Self-defense, clean and simple. Sheriff Turner saw the whole thing from the end of the street." They rode hard for the next hour, pushing their horses to a pace that ate up the miles between Cheyenne and the open country beyond. The deputy left them at the county line, returning to report to Sheriff Turner, while Brody led Zara onto less traveled trails that wound through the rolling hills. "Do you think they're still following?" Zara asked when they finally slowed their horses to a walk, the animals' sides heaving from exertion. Brody scanned the horizon behind them. "Probably. Zachary doesn't strike me as a man who gives up easily. But we've put enough distance between us that we can afford to rest the horses for a bit." They dismounted in the shade of a small stand of cottonwoods near a trickling stream, allowing the horses to drink while they stretched their legs. Zara's muscles ached from the hard riding, but the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional strain of the morning's events. "I was so afraid for you," she admitted, watching Brody check his horse's hooves for stones. "When I heard those shots." Brody straightened, his expression softening as he met her gaze. "I'm sorry you had to go through that, but I meant what I said to the judge, Zara. I won't stand by and let someone suffer if I can prevent it." "Is that all this is to you?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Preventing suffering, honoring your sister's memory." The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither had directly addressed. Brody took a step closer, close enough that Zara could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. "No," he said simply, "that's not all it is." Her heart quickened at his words and the intensity of his gaze. "What is it then?" Before Brody could answer, the distant sound of hoofbeats alerted them to approaching riders. He swore under his breath, turning to scan the horizon. "4 riders coming fast," he reported, his voice tense. "Could be Zachary and his men." Zara felt fear grip her heart once more. "Will we never be free of him?" "We will," Brody promised, helping her quickly mount her horse. "But first, we need to reach Silvercrest. My men will be waiting there. Zachary wouldn't dare attack a defended ranch, not even in his current state of mind." They set off again, pushing their tired horses as much as they dared. The terrain grew more rugged as they left the main trails, following paths that only someone intimately familiar with the land would know. Brody led them through narrow canyons and across shallow stream beds, constantly checking behind to ensure their pursuers hadn't gained ground. By mid-afternoon, the familiar outline of Silvercrest Ranch appeared in the distance. Zara had never seen a more welcome sight. As they approached, she could make out figures moving in the yard, ranch hands alerted to their return by the lookout Brody had mentioned posting. "Almost there," Brody encouraged as they urged their weary horses up the final slope. "Just a little further." They clattered into the ranch yard to find half a dozen of Brody's men waiting, rifles ready. Martha stood on the porch, her face lined with worry that dissolved into relief when she saw them both unharmed. "Inside, quick," she called, gesturing urgently. "We've been watching the road for hours." Brody helped Zara dismount, her legs so stiff from the long ride that she stumbled as her feet hit the ground. He caught her arm, steadying her with a gentle touch that lingered longer than necessary. "Get some men to watch the approach road," he instructed one of the ranch hands. "Gilmore and his thugs aren't far behind us." As they entered the house, Martha immediately took charge, ushering Zara toward a chair and pressing a cup of hot coffee into her hands. "You poor thing, you look exhausted. Did you get to see the judge? What happened?" Between sips of reviving coffee, Zara and Brody recounted the events in Cheyenne, the meeting with Judge Harmon, the order of protection, the divorce petition, and finally, Zachary's pursuit and the confrontation on the road. "So he knows you're here," Martha concluded, her expression grim. "And he's angry enough to do something foolish." "That about sums it up," Brody agreed, accepting his own cup of coffee. "But he'd be a fool to attack the ranch directly. We've got enough men and guns to hold off twice his number." "Unless he brings more men," Martha pointed out pragmatically. "He's got the money to hire an army of gun hands if he's of a mind to." The thought sent a chill through Zara. How far would Zachary go to reclaim her? Would he risk a full-scale range war just to satisfy his pride? As if reading her thoughts, Brody placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry. Zachary may be angry and wounded in his pride, but he's not stupid. A frontal assault on Silvercrest would be suicide, and he knows it." "Then what will he do?" Zara asked, unable to believe that Zachary would simply accept defeat. Brody's expression hardened. "He'll try something underhanded, waiting until we're vulnerable, perhaps, or attempting to lure you away from the ranch's protection." "Which is why you're not to set foot outside without an escort," Martha declared firmly. "Not until this is resolved one way or another." Zara nodded, accepting the restriction without complaint. After years of Zachary's arbitrary confinements, the protective concern of these people felt entirely different, born of care rather than control. The sound of a rider approaching at speed drew their attention to the window. One of Brody's men galloped into the yard, reining in sharply before dismounting and hurrying toward the house. "They're coming, boss," he reported as Brody met him at the door. "Gilmore's got at least 10 men with him. They're about 2 miles out, moving slow but steady." Brody's jaw tightened. 10 men, more than I expected. He turned to Martha. "Get Zara to the back bedroom. It's the most defensible room in the house." "I won't hide while you risk your lives for me," Zara protested, rising from her chair. "This isn't the time for heroics, Zara," Brody replied, his voice gentle but firm. "I need to know you're safe so I can focus on dealing with Zachary." Before she could argue further, a call from outside announced more riders approaching, but from the west, not the direction Zachary was expected from. Brody moved to the window, his expression changing to one of surprised relief. "It's Sheriff Turner," he announced, "with at least a dozen men." Hope surged within Zara as she joined him at the window. Sure enough, Sheriff Turner was leading a substantial posse toward the ranch, their dust trail visible for miles behind them. "He must have followed Zachary from Cheyenne," Brody surmised, a grim smile touching his lips. "The judge probably ordered him to enforce that protection order personally." They moved to the porch as the sheriff's posse rode into the yard. Turner dismounted, his weathered face serious as he approached them. "Gilmore's not far behind us," he said without preamble. "Judge Harmon was mighty displeased to hear about the altercation in town. Sent me to make sure his court order is respected." He glanced at Zara. "You all right, Mrs. Gilmore?" "I'm fine, Sheriff," she assured him. "Thanks to Mr. Valente and now to you." Turner nodded, then turned his attention back to Brody. "We spotted Gilmore and his men about 3 miles back. They saw us too, but kept coming. Man's either very determined or very foolish." Or both, Brody suggested grimly. The sheriff positioned his men around the ranch yard, creating a formidable defensive line that would be clearly visible to anyone approaching. I'm hoping the sight of a legal posse will make Gilmore reconsider whatever he's planning, Turner explained. But if not, we're prepared to arrest him for violating the court order. The waiting was almost worse than the pursuit had been. Zara paced the length of the porch, her nerves drawn tight as a bowstring. Brody remained at her side, his calm presence the only thing keeping her from unraveling completely. "He won't hurt you again," Brody promised softly, standing close enough that only she could hear. "I swear it, Zara." She looked up at him, finding unexpected strength in the steadiness of his gaze. "It's not myself I'm worried about," she admitted. "It's you, all of you. Zachary won't forget this, even if he retreats today. He'll harbor this grudge for years." "Let him," Brody replied simply. "I've never been one to make decisions based on fear of what might come." A shout from one of the lookouts alerted them to approaching riders. Zachary and his men had crested the final rise before the ranch, drawing their horses to a halt as they observed the sheriff's posse arrayed before them. "Stay here," Brody instructed Zara, moving to join Sheriff Turner as Zachary and two of his men continued forward, leaving the rest of their group behind. Zara remained on the porch, her hands gripping the railing so tightly that her knuckles whitened. From this distance, she could see Zachary's face clearly, the cold fury in his expression, the rigid set of his shoulders that spoke of barely contained rage. The three riders stopped a short distance from where Brody and the sheriff waited. Though she couldn't hear their words, the tension in the tableau was palpable. Sheriff Turner appeared to be doing most of the talking, occasionally gesturing toward the posse behind him. Zachary sat stiffly in his saddle, his responses brief and clearly hostile. At one point, Zachary's gaze shifted to the porch where Zara stood. Even across the distance, she could feel the heat of his anger, the promise of retribution in his stare. Instinctively, she took a step back, though part of her wanted to stand her ground to show him she was no longer afraid. The conversation continued for several minutes before Zachary suddenly spurred his horse forward, closing the distance between himself and where Brody stood. For a heart-stopping moment, Zara thought he meant to ride Brody down, but he reined in at the last moment, leaning down to say something directly to Brody's face. Whatever he said caused Brody's expression to harden, his hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip. Sheriff Turner stepped between them, his own hand raised in a gesture that was both warning and plea for calm. Finally, with a last venomous glance toward the porch, Zachary wheeled his horse and rejoined his men. The group conferred briefly before turning and riding back the way they had come, their retreat clearly reluctant but inevitable in the face of the sheriff's superior numbers. Zara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding as Brody and Sheriff Turner walked back toward the house. "He's gone," Brody confirmed as he reached the porch. "For now, at least." "What did he say to you?" Zara asked, noting the lingering tension in Brody's shoulders. A muscle worked in Brody's jaw. "Nothing worth repeating," he replied evasively. "Just threats and bluster." Sheriff Turner was more forthright. Said this wasn't over, that he'd be watching and waiting. "Man's obsessed, if you don't mind my saying so, Mrs. Gilmore. I'd advise staying close to home for a good while." "We'll keep her safe," Brody assured the sheriff. "And we're grateful for your intervention today." Turner nodded, replacing his hat as he prepared to leave. "Judge Harmon set the first hearing for your divorce petition 3 weeks from now, Mrs. Gilmore. Gilmore will be formally served with papers tomorrow. Until then, that order of protection stands. If he comes within 100 yards of you, he'll find himself in my jail." After the sheriff and his men departed, A sense of anticlimax settled over the ranch. The immediate danger had passed, but Zara knew that Zachary's retreat was tactical, not final. This chapter of her life was far from closed. Martha, practical as ever, insisted that they all needed food and rest after the day's ordeal. As they gathered around the kitchen table for a simple but hearty meal, Zara found herself studying Brody covertly. Something about Zachary's parting words had disturbed him deeply, beyond what he was willing to share. Later, as twilight softened the edges of the day, Zara found herself drawn to the porch, where the cooling air carried the scent of pine and sage. The enormity of the day's events washed over her: the confrontation with the judge, the escape from Cheyenne, Zachary's pursuit, and finally, his reluctant retreat. She had set in motion changes that could never be reversed, burning bridges to her old life even as she remained uncertain of what the future held. The sound of footsteps alerted her to Brody's approach. He joined her at the porch railing, his gaze following hers to where the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "You should be resting," he said gently. "So should you," Zara countered. "Yet here we both are." A small smile touched his lips. "Too much on your mind." "Everything and nothing," she admitted. "It all happened so quickly. 3 days ago I was locked in my bedroom at Zachary's ranch. Now I'm here with a divorce petition filed and an order of protection in my possession. It hardly seems real. Do you regret it?" Brody asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Your decision to leave?" "No," Zara replied without hesitation. "Not for a moment. I only regret that I didn't find the courage sooner." She turned to face him directly. "Brody, what did Zachary say to you today? The truth, please." Brody was silent for a long moment, his profile etched against the darkening sky. "He said that he knew about Rebecca," he finally admitted. "About what happened to her. He implied that you would meet the same fate if I continued to care for you." A chill ran through Zara despite the mild evening. "How could he know about your sister? Small territories have long memories," Brody replied grimly. "And Zachary's not above using those memories as weapons." "I'm sorry," Zara whispered, "that he would use your grief that way." "Don't be sorry," Brody said, echoing the words he had spoken on their first ride to Silver Crest. "It only confirms what I already knew, that he's a man without honor." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of Zachary's threat hanging between them. "Did you mean what you said earlier?" Zara asked finally. "When I asked if this was only about preventing suffering and honoring Rebecca's memory," Brody turned to face her fully, his eyes serious in the fading light. "I meant it. This stopped being only about Rebecca the moment I saw you standing in that locked room, defiant despite your fear." He hesitated, then continued more softly. "I know it's too soon. You're still legally married, still in danger. But I can't deny that I've come to care for you, Zara. More than I should, perhaps, given the circumstances." His honesty took her breath away. In Zachary, she had seen only possessiveness masquerading as love. In Brody, she saw something entirely different: respect, admiration, and yes, affection, offered without demand or expectation. "It's not too soon to acknowledge the truth," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "These past days have shown me what real strength looks like, what real caring looks like." She met his gaze steadily. "I've come to care for you too, Brody." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle as his fingers entwined with hers. "We'll take this slow," he promised. "One day at a time. First, we need to ensure your freedom from Zachary legally and permanently. The rest can wait." His restraint only increased her regard for him. Where Zachary had demanded immediate possession, Brody offered patient commitment to her well-being. "One day at a time," she agreed, squeezing his hand gently. "Beginning with tomorrow." The days that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. Zara found herself welcomed into the daily life of Silvercrest Ranch with a warmth and acceptance she had never experienced at Zachary's property. Martha took her under her wing, teaching her the practical aspects of running a ranch household, skills Zachary had never allowed her to develop, preferring to keep her ornamental rather than useful. Brody was true to his word about taking things slow. His care for her was evident in 1,000 small ways, making sure she had everything she needed, introducing her to the ranch hands and the rhythms of life at Silvercrest, riding with her to show her the boundaries of his land. But he never pressured her, never presumed upon the fragile connection growing between them. News from town came regularly. Sheriff Turner sent word that Zachary had returned to his ranch after being formally served with the divorce papers. The first hearing was approaching, and though Zara dreaded facing Zachary across a courtroom, she drew strength from knowing she wouldn't face him alone. 2 weeks after their escape from Cheyenne, Zara was helping Martha hang laundry in the yard when a rider approached the ranch, not from the direction of town, but from the hills to the north. "That's odd," Martha commented, shading her eyes to see better. "Nobody uses that trail except," she broke off, her expression changing to one of alarm. "Get inside, Zara, now." "What is it?" Zara asked, instantly alert to the older woman's tone. "That's one of Gilmore's men," Martha replied tersely. "I recognize him from town." Fear clutched at Zara's heart as she hurried toward the house, Martha close behind her. Brody was out with most of the hands, checking on a herd in the south pasture. Only 3 men remained at the ranch, and they were currently in the barn, too far to call for immediate help. Martha bolted the door behind them, then moved to the cabinet where Brody kept a shotgun. "Stay away from the windows," she instructed, checking that the weapon was loaded. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped. A moment later, a knock sounded at the door. "Mrs. Valente." A male voice called. "I have a message for Mrs. Gilmore." Martha and Zara exchanged glances. "I'm not opening this door," Martha called back firmly. "State your business and be on your way." "It's regarding her divorce petition," the man replied. "Mr. Gilmore wishes to propose a settlement." "I have the paperwork here." Zara's pulse quickened. A settlement? Could Zachary truly be willing to end their marriage without further conflict? "Leave it on the porch," Martha instructed, her grip on the shotgun not relaxing. "I'm afraid I need Mrs. Gilmore's signature," the man persisted. "Mr. Gilmore is prepared to be quite generous in his terms." "This doesn't feel right," Zara whispered to Martha. "Zachary would never give up so easily." Martha nodded her agreement. "Ride on, mister," she called through the door. "Mrs. Gilmore will review any proposals through her lawyer in Cheyenne." A moment of silence followed her words, then the sound of footsteps retreating from the porch. Zara began to relax, thinking the man had accepted Martha's refusal. Then came a crash from the back of the house, the sound of breaking glass. "The kitchen door," Martha gasped, already moving in that direction, shotgun raised. They were too late. 2 men burst into the house from the back entrance, their faces masked with bandanas. One held a gun, which he pointed directly at Martha. "Drop it, old woman," he ordered, "or I'll put a hole in you." Martha hesitated, her finger on the trigger of the shotgun. "Please, Martha," Zara begged, "don't risk your life." With clear reluctance, Martha lowered the shotgun, placing it carefully on the floor. One of the intruders kicked it aside while the other grabbed Zara's arm in a painful grip. "Mr. Gilmore wants to speak with his wife," he said, his eyes cold above the bandana. "Privately." "I have an order of protection," Zara protested, struggling against his hold. "This is kidnapping," the man laughed. "Call it what you want, lady, you're coming with us." "What about the old woman?" his companion asked, gesturing toward Martha with his gun. "Tie her up," the first man instructed. "By the time she gets loose, we'll be long gone." Despite Martha's fierce resistance, they bound her securely to a kitchen chair, gagging her to prevent her from calling for help. Zara fought with all her strength as they dragged her from the house, but she was no match for the two burly men. Outside, 3 horses waited, 2 saddled, and a third with a crude pillion seat attached behind the saddle. They forced Zara onto this third horse, tying her hands to the saddle horn before the first man mounted behind her. Without a backward glance at the ranch house, they set off at a gallop, taking the same trail through the northern hills that they had arrived by. Zara's mind raced as they rode. Where were they taking her? To Zachary, certainly, but where? Not to his ranch. Brody would look there first. Somewhere isolated, then, where Zachary could confront her without interference. Her fears were confirmed when, after nearly 2 hours of hard riding, they approached a small cabin nestled in a wooded valley. Smoke rose from its chimney, and a familiar horse was tethered outside Zachary's prized stallion. The men pulled their horses to a halt before the cabin. Without ceremony, the man behind Zara untied her hands from the saddle horn, then shoved her roughly to the ground. She stumbled but managed to keep her feet, her legs numb from the uncomfortable ride. "Inside," one of the men ordered, prodding her forward with the barrel of his gun. "Mr. Gilmore's waiting." The cabin's interior was dim after the bright sunlight outside. As Zara's eyes adjusted, she made out a figure seated at a crude table, Zachary, a glass of whiskey in hand, watching her with cold, calculating eyes. "Hello, my dear," he said, his voice deceptively mild. "How kind of you to join me." "I didn't have much choice," Zara replied, lifting her chin defiantly despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Your men kidnapped me at gunpoint." Zachary waved a dismissive hand. "A necessary measure, since you've surrounded yourself with those who would keep us apart." He gestured to a chair across from him. "Sit, Zara. We have much to discuss." When she remained standing, one of the men shoved her roughly toward the chair. Seeing no immediate alternative, Zara sat, keeping her back straight and her gaze steady on Zachary's face. "Leave us," Zachary instructed the men. "Wait outside. Make sure we're not disturbed." The men nodded and exited the cabin, closing the door behind them. Alone with Zachary for the first time since her escape, Zara felt a familiar dread creeping over her, but she fought it back. She was not the same woman who had meekly accepted his punishments. She would not cower before him now. "What do you want, Zachary?" she asked directly. "Why bring me here?" Zachary studied her for a long moment, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "You've changed," he observed. "A few weeks with that cowboy and suddenly you think you're entitled to make demands." His expression hardened. "You're still my wife, Zara. Your place is at my side, not warming another man's bed." "I haven't," Zara began indignantly, then stopped herself. She owed Zachary no explanations. "My place is wherever I choose it to be, and I choose to be free of you." Zachary's hand tightened around his glass. "Is that what you think? That you can simply choose to leave me? That I'll allow some territorial judge to dissolve our marriage because you claim I was cruel?" He leaned forward, his eyes glittering dangerously. "You took vows, Zara. Till death do us part. I intend to hold you to those vows." A chill ran down Zara's spine at his words and the implicit threat they contained. "The law is on my side, Zachary. Kidnapping me won't change that. It will only add to the charges against you." "The law," Zachary scoffed. "Do you know how easy it is to buy judges and sheriffs in this territory? Money speaks louder than a woman's complaints about her husband's discipline." "Is that what you called it?" Zara asked, anger overriding her fear. "Discipline? You locked me away for days because I spoke to another human being. You controlled every aspect of my life, what I wore, who I spoke to, where I went. That's not discipline, Zachary. That's tyranny." Her words seemed to strike a nerve. Zachary's face flushed with anger as he slammed his glass down on the table, whiskey sloshing over the rim. "You were mine to control. A wife belongs to her husband's body, mind, and soul. That cowboy has filled your head with nonsense about rights and freedom, but the truth is simpler. You're my property, and I've come to reclaim what's mine." "I am not property," Zara replied, her voice steady despite the hammer of her heart. "I never was. I was a fool to marry you, to believe your lies about love and adventure, but that mistake ends now." Zachary rose from his chair, his movements deliberate as he circled the table toward her. Zara stood quickly, unwilling to remain seated with him looming over her. "There's only one way this mistake ends, my dear," he said softly, reaching out to touch her cheek in a caress that made her skin crawl. "You're coming home with me. Tonight. You'll withdraw your divorce petition, dismiss this ridiculous order of protection, and resume your proper place as my wife. If you do this willingly, I might be persuaded to forgive your indiscretions." Zara jerked away from his touch. "And if I refuse," Zachary's smile held no warmth, "then I'll be forced to take more drastic measures. Your cowboy friend has a fine ranch. It would be a shame if it burned to the ground some night with all inside." Horror washed over Zara at the casual threat. "You wouldn't, wouldn't I?" Zachary countered, his voice soft but venomous. "You've seen what I'm capable of when crossed, Zara. You really want to test the limits of my patience?" She stared at him, truly seeing him perhaps for the first time, not the charming, sophisticated man who had courted her in Boston, but the monster beneath the mask. How had she ever believed herself in love with this man? "You're despicable," she whispered. Zachary's hand shot out, gripping her upper arm painfully. "I've indulged your defiance long enough. You're my wife and you will obey me. We leave for home within the hour." "I'll run again," Zara warned, wincing at his bruising grip but refusing to show weakness. "Every time you turn your back, I'll find a way to escape. You'll have to lock me in that bedroom for the rest of my life." "If that's what it takes," Zachary growled, "so be it. But I think you'll find your spirit broken much sooner than that, especially when you learn what happened to your precious cowboy while you were away." Fear clutched at Zara's heart. "What have you done to Brody?" A cruel smile curved Zachary's lips. "Nothing. Yet. But my men are watching Silvercrest. When Valente returns and finds you missing, he'll come looking for you. My men have instructions to lead him here alone. He'll find you, Zara, but not in the way he hopes." The full horror of Zachary's plan dawned on Zara. He intended to lure Brody into a trap, using her as bait. "You can't," she pleaded, her composure cracking for the first time. "Please, Zachary, your quarrel is with me, not him." "He made it his quarrel when he took what's mine," Zachary replied coldly. "Don't worry, my dear. You won't have to witness his demise. By the time he arrives, we'll be well on our way home." Desperation fueled Zara's next actions. With a strength born of fear for Brody rather than herself, she wrenched free of Zachary's grip and lunged for the door. Zachary's reflexes were quicker than she anticipated. He grabbed her from behind, one arm encircling her waist while his other hand clamped over her mouth to stifle her scream. "That was foolish," he hissed in her ear as she struggled against his hold. "Very foolish indeed." The door burst open before Zachary could say more. One of his hired men stood in the doorway, his expression urgent. "Riders coming, Mr. Gilmore," he reported tersely. "At least 6 of them, moving fast. Looks like Valente found us sooner than expected." Zachary swore viciously, his grip tightening around Zara. "How?" The woman was securely tied. "Don't know, sir, but they'll be here in minutes." Indecision flickered across Zachary's face, quickly replaced by cold calculation. "Change of plans," he announced. "If Valente wants a confrontation, I'll give him one, on my terms." He shoved Zara toward the hired man. "Tie her to that chair, make it tight." Despite Zara's renewed struggles, the man efficiently bound her to one of the heavy wooden chairs, securing her wrists to the arms and her ankles to the legs. Zachary watched with satisfaction before retrieving a rifle from a rack on the wall. "We'll greet our visitors from the high ground," he instructed his men. "Ambush positions. No one fires until I give the order. I want Valente alive for now." As the men moved to take their positions, Zachary approached Zara once more, bending to whisper in her ear. "Watch closely, my dear. Your cowboy dies today because of you. Remember that when you're back in your room at our home, alone with your grief and guilt." With those parting words, he strode from the cabin, leaving Zara alone, bound to the chair, her heart pounding with terror not for herself, but for Brody and his men riding unknowingly into Zachary's trap. Frantically, she strained against her bonds, but the ropes held firm. She tried rocking the chair, hoping to overturn it and perhaps break it, but it was too solidly built. Tears of frustration welled in her eyes as she heard the distant sound of approaching horses. Brody was coming for her, just as Zachary had predicted, and she was powerless to warn him. The minutes that followed were among the most agonizing of Zara's life. From her position in the cabin, she could see nothing of what was happening outside, but her imagination painted vivid, horrible pictures: Brody and his men riding into the clearing, Zachary and his hired guns opening fire from concealed positions. The sound of gunfire, when it finally came, made her flinch violently. One shot, then another. Then a fusillade erupted, the sound of multiple guns firing in rapid succession. Men shouted. A horse screamed in pain. More gunfire. Then, horrifyingly, silence. Zara held her breath, straining to hear any sound that might tell her what had happened. Who had prevailed? Was Brody alive or dead? The uncertainty was unbearable. The cabin door swung open, backlighting a tall figure in the doorway. For one terrible moment, Zara thought it was Zachary returning victorious. Then the figure stepped inside, and relief washed over her like a physical wave. "Brody," she cried, tears streaming down her face. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides, dropping to his knees beside her chair. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands already working to untie her bonds. "Did he touch you?" "No, I'm all right," she assured him, drinking in the sight of him disheveled, a smudge of gunpowder on his cheek, but gloriously alive. "But Zachary, he planned to ambush you." "How did you, Martha?" Brody explained, freeing her wrists. "She managed to work herself loose and get to one of the hands. He rode out to find us." The ropes fell away from her ankles, and Brody helped her to her feet. "We approached from the ridge instead of the trail, caught them by surprise." Zara's legs trembled beneath her, partly from being bound and partly from the aftermath of fear. Brody's arm went around her waist, supporting her. "Zachary?" she asked hesitantly, dreading the answer. "Wounded, not killed," Brody replied grimly. "He took a bullet in the shoulder when he tried to make a run for it. Sheriff Turner's men have him now." "Sheriff Turner is here?" Zara asked, surprised. Brody nodded. "He was already at Silvercrest when Martha raised the alarm. Came to warn us that Zachary had been seen in the area with some rough-looking men." He guided her toward the door. "Come on, let's get you out of here." Outside, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Several of Zachary's hired men lay on the ground, some wounded, others securely bound. Sheriff Turner and his deputies were taking charge of the prisoners, while Brody's ranch hands tended to the horses. And there, seated on the ground with his back against a tree, was Zachary. His expensive coat was stained with blood from a wound in his left shoulder, and his face was pale with pain and fury. A deputy stood guard over him, rifle ready. As Brody led Zara past him toward the horses, Zachary's eyes found hers. The hatred in his gaze was palpable, but beneath it, Zara thought she detected something else: defeat. For the first time, Zachary Gilmore had not gotten his way, and he knew it. "This changes nothing," he called after her, his voice strained but still arrogant. "You're still my wife. I'll see you both in court." Brody tensed beside her, but Zara squeezed his arm gently. "He's not worth it," she murmured. "He's beaten, and he knows it." The ride back to Silvercrest was slow, accommodating Zara's exhaustion and the wounded men who traveled with them. Sheriff Turner rode alongside Brody and Zara, filling them in on what would happen next. "Kidnapping is a serious offense," he explained. "Add to that attempted murder, assault, and violation of a court order. Gilmore's looking at years in territorial prison, rich man or not." "Will I still need to appear for the divorce hearing?" Zara asked, dreading the prospect of facing Zachary in court after the day's events. "I expect Judge Harmon will expedite matters under the circumstances," Turner replied. "But yes, you'll need to testify. Gilmore's actions today will only strengthen your case." As they approached Silvercrest in the gathering dusk, Zara was overcome with a profound sense of homecoming. The ranch house, warm light spilling from its windows, represented safety and acceptance in a way that Zachary's grand mansion never had. Martha was waiting on the porch, her weathered face showing signs of her own ordeal: a bruise on her cheek where one of Zachary's men had struck her, and rope burns on her wrists. But her eyes lit up with relief when she saw Zara safe. "Thank God," she breathed, hurrying down the steps to embrace Zara as Brody helped her dismount. "When those men took you, I feared." "I'm all right," Zara assured her, returning the embrace. "Thanks to you, Brody told me how you raised the alarm." Martha waved away the praise. "Anyone would have done the same. Now come inside, both of you. You look dead on your feet, and I've got stew on the stove." The simple normalcy of Martha's concern was exactly what Zara needed after the terror of the day. As they settled around the kitchen table, the familiar routine of passing bowls and breaking bread brought a sense of peace that contrasted sharply with the violence they had just experienced. Sheriff Turner joined them briefly, before heading back to town with his prisoners. "I'll send word when Judge Harmon sets a new date for the hearing," he promised as he prepared to leave. "In the meantime, Mrs. Gilmore, you should be safe here. Gilmore won't be posting bail anytime soon, not with the charges he's facing." After the sheriff's departure, Zara found herself fighting to keep her eyes open. The emotional and physical toll of the day had left her utterly drained. "You should rest," Brody said gently, noting her exhaustion. "Tomorrow will be soon enough to talk about what happens next." Martha showed her to the bedroom that had become hers during her stay at Silvercrest. As Zara prepared for sleep, her mind returned to the moment she had seen Brody in the doorway of the cabin, the surge of relief and something deeper, something that had nothing to do with rescue and everything to do with the man himself. A soft knock at her door roused her from these thoughts. "Yes." "It's me," Brody's voice came through the door. "May I come in for a moment?" Zara wrapped a shawl around her shoulders over her nightgown. "Of course." Brody entered, remaining near the door as if uncertain of his welcome. His face showed the strain of the day: concern for her, the aftermath of violence, perhaps even guilt that she had been taken at all. "I needed to make sure you were really all right," he said softly. "When I came back to the ranch and found Martha tied up and you gone, I've never been so afraid." The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep within Zara. I was afraid too, she admitted. Not for myself, but for you. Zachary planned to use me as bait to lure you into a trap. He nearly succeeded, Brody replied grimly, if Martha hadn't gotten free when she did. He shook his head, unwilling to complete the thought. But she did, Zara reminded him, and you came for me, just as you've been doing since the day you broke down my bedroom door. Brody took a hesitant step toward her. I'll always come for you, Zara, wherever you are, whatever you need. If you'll let me. The simple promise brought tears to Zara's eyes. In that moment the last of her doubts fell away. This was what love looked like, not Zachary's possessive control, but Brody's steady support, not ownership, but partnership. I want that, she whispered. I want you, Brody. Not because you rescued me or protected me, but because of who you are, the man who sees me as a person, not a possession. Something fierce and tender blazed in Brody's eyes at her words. He crossed the remaining distance between them, his hands gently framing her face. I've been falling in love with you since the moment you stood up to Zachary in that hotel hallway, he confessed. Your courage, your determination, your capacity for joy despite everything you've endured. You're the strongest person I've ever known, Zara Gilmore. Not Gilmore, she corrected softly. Not anymore. Zara Gaines, that's who I was before him and who I'll be again. Zara Gaines, Brody repeated, a smile touching his lips. It suits you. His thumb traced the curve of her cheek. May I kiss you, Zara Gaines? In answer, she rose on her tiptoes, her hands resting lightly on his chest as her lips met his. The kiss was gentle at first, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened into something more urgent. Brody's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, while Zara's hands slid up to thread through his hair. When they finally parted, both breathless, Brody rested his forehead against hers. I should go, he murmured, though he made no move to release her. You need rest, and you're still technically married, and Zara silenced him with another brief kiss. You're right, she agreed reluctantly, about all of it, but this isn't goodbye, Brody, it's just good night. His smile illuminated his entire face. Good night then, Zara Gaines, sleep well. After he left, closing the door softly behind him, Zara sank onto the edge of her bed. Her lips still tingled from his kiss, and her heart felt fuller than she could ever remember. For the first time in years, she looked toward the future with joy rather than dread. 3 weeks later, Zara stood before Judge Harmon in the Cheyenne courthouse, her head held high as she formally requested dissolution of her marriage to Zachary Gilmore. Zachary himself was present, his arm in a sling, his face haggard from his time in the sheriff's custody. He offered no defense against her petition, his fight seemingly gone from him. When Judge Harmon asked if he objected to the divorce, Zachary merely shook his head. Let her go, he said dully. She was never truly mine. The judge's gavel fell, declaring the marriage dissolved. Zara felt a weight lift from her shoulders as she walked from the courtroom, Brody waiting for her in the corridor outside. It's done, he asked, taking her hands in his. It's done, she confirmed, a smile of pure joy illuminating her face. I'm free. Brody lifted her hands to his lips, kissing each in turn. Then may I properly court you, Miss Gaines, with no shadows from the past standing between us. Zara laughed, the sound bright and unfettered. You may, Mr. Valente, though I warn you I've become quite independent these past weeks. I may not be as biddable as the proper society ladies you're accustomed to. Thank God for that, Brody replied fervently. I've never had much use for biddable women. Their courtship unfolded over the changing seasons, autumn into winter, winter into spring. Brody proved to be a patient and considerate suitor, never pressing Zara beyond her comfort, allowing her the space to rediscover herself after years of suppression. Zara blossomed under his respectful attention. She learned to ride astride rather than side saddle, to shoot a rifle with reasonable accuracy, to manage the household accounts that Martha had previously handled alone. She discovered talents and interests Zachary had never allowed her to explore, and with each new skill mastered, her confidence grew. By the time spring painted the hills with wildflowers, Brody and Zara's feelings for each other had deepened into a love built on mutual respect and shared understanding. They were married on a perfect May morning, with Martha beaming like a proud parent and Sheriff Turner standing as Brody's best man. "Not anymore," Brody whispered as he slipped the ring onto Zara's finger, echoing the words he had spoken when he broke down her bedroom door. "You'll never be caged again." "Not anymore," Zara agreed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Only freedom from now on, freedom and love." 5 years later, Zara Valente stood on the porch of the Silvercrest Ranch house, watching as her husband taught their 3-year-old daughter to sit a pony in the yard. Little Rebecca's laughter rang out as Brody led the gentle animal in a circle, his hand steady on her back to ensure she didn't fall. "Again, Papa," the child demanded when they completed the circle. "Faster this time." "You're a natural, Becca," Brody declared proudly. "Just like your mama." From her place on a blanket under a nearby tree, Martha looked up from her knitting to supervise 9-month-old Thomas, who was attempting to crawl toward the fascinating spectacle of his sister on horseback. "Oh no you don't, young man," Martha chuckled, gently redirecting him. "You've got a few years yet before you join that adventure." Zara smiled, one hand resting unconsciously on her stomach, where a third child had just begun to make its presence known. She hadn't told Brody yet, wanting to be certain before sharing the news. But as she watched him with their children patient, loving, his face alight with joy, she knew he would be overjoyed. Life at Silvercrest had flourished in the years since she and Brody married. The ranch had prospered under their joint management, expanding its operations and reputation for quality stock. They had built a new wing onto the house to accommodate their growing family, and Zara had established a small school for the children of neighboring ranchers who lived too far from town to attend regularly. Zachary Gilmore had served 3 years in the territorial prison for his crimes before being released. He had sold his ranch and left Wyoming, rumored to have returned east, a broken man in both body and spirit. Zara had felt no satisfaction at his downfall, only relief that his shadow no longer darkened her life. "Mama, look," Rebecca called, waving excitedly as Brody lifted her from the pony. "I rode all by myself." "I saw, sweetheart," Zara called back, descending the porch steps to meet them. "You're becoming quite the horsewoman." Brody set their daughter on her feet and she ran to Zara, wrapping small arms around her mother's legs. "Papa says when I'm bigger, I can have my very own pony. Not a borrowed one, did he now?" Zara asked, raising an eyebrow at her husband. "And when were you planning to consult me about this decision?" Brody's blue eyes twinkled with mischief as he approached. "I was hoping to butter you up with dinner and perhaps a moonlit ride first," he admitted, bending to kiss her cheek. "Has my cunning plan been foiled?" "Thoroughly," Zara replied, unable to maintain her stern expression in the face of his charm. "But I might be persuaded given the right incentives." "Name your price, Mrs. Valente," Brody murmured, his arms slipping around her waist. Zara glanced at their daughter, now racing back to tell Martha about her riding adventure, then at their son, contentedly playing with a wooden toy on his blanket. Her family, her freedom, her joy. "I have everything I could possibly want," she said softly, leaning into her husband's embrace. "You gave me a life I never dared to dream of, Brody." His arms tightened around her. "We built it together," he corrected gently. That day I broke down your door, I freed you from a cage, but you, Zara, you've been freeing me ever since in ways I never knew I needed. As the Wyoming sun sank toward the distant mountains, casting long golden light across the ranch they had made into a true home, Zara thought of how far she had come from that locked bedroom. The journey had been neither easy nor straight, but every step had led her here to a love built on respect, to a family bound by affection rather than obligation, to a life rich with purpose and joy. "Not anymore," she whispered, the words that had once been a defiant challenge now a grateful affirmation. Never again would anyone lock her away. Never again would she surrender her voice or her choices. With Brody beside her and their children around them, she had found not just freedom but its ultimate expression. The liberty to love and be loved completely without reservation or condition. The cage was broken. The door stood open. And before her stretched a future as vast and promising as the Wyoming sky.